Hey, it's Jess. Welcome back. Today I'm here with my July wrap up where I will be talking about all the books that I read in July and what I thought of them. As usual, I will be putting my stats from Storygraph up on the screen. I have my phone here to help me check it out. Looking at my Goodreads, I read a total of 14 books in July, which is amazing. I knew I'd read a lot, but man, it's been a long time since I've read that many books in one month. That averaged out to be 4,131 pages. So I got a lot done in the month of July. Again, Storygraph added a feature about the average time to finish a book, and mine was 6 days in the month of July. Looking at my moods, nothing surprising, just like it almost never is. Dark, tense, emotional. I read all nonfiction books. I didn't get to any nonfictions. I started a few nonfiction books in July, but I haven't finished them yet, so I didn't get to count them for this month. Looking at my genres, horror, thriller, romance. The top two, not a surprise, especially because we had Summerween this month. A bunch of the books I read immediately were horror books. Or dark. So it definitely isn't a surprise to me that those were my top read categories. Looking at the formats of the books that I read, 6 of them were physical books, 4 were audiobooks, and 4 were ebooks. My average star rating was 3.93 stars. I had kind of a mediocre month. I had 2 3-star books, 4 3.5 star, 4 4-star, 2 4.5, and 2 5-star books. Again, super happy that I'm getting 5-star books again because I really missed those. Starting with my 3-star books, the first one I read was No One Rides for Free by Judith Sonnet. This is a book that I read for Summerween for the prompt, read a book with 5 words in the title. I don't even know if this book really deserves a rating. I don't know how to even talk about this book. It is an extreme horror. Extreme. Vile, gross, disgusting. She wrote it that way. There's an author's note at the end that Judith Sonnet was like, hey, I had this idea and I wanted to make it as gross as possible, and boy, howdy does she succeed. So if that's something you're into, maybe check it out. It is about a woman who is driving her 2 children back to college for the year, and she stops at a gas station, and when she gets back in her car, there is a mysterious man in her car holding her children hostage. Then she becomes a hostage, and he tells her to drive. And things kind of just go even more downhill, more depraved, grosser after that. I gave it 3 stars, not because I'm against extreme horror. I read extreme horror. I don't know, it's just, while this one stuck with me, I don't think it stuck with me in the way that, well, it probably is the way Judith Sonnet wanted it to, but I would prefer to forget that I read this book. I did enjoy it. It's very short. I read it in an afternoon. And yeah, if you're into some extreme horror, check this book out. My next 3-star book was Wretched by Emily McIntyre. This is the 3rd book in the Never After series, which is a series of dark romances that are actually fractured fairy tales. This book is incredibly loosely based on The Wizard of Oz. This was definitely my least favorite out of the 3 Emily McIntyre books I've read. In this book, you are following Eveline Westerly and her family, her older sister Dorothy, and their father, whose name is Farrell. They are like drug dealers. And then you are also following Nick, who is an agent who goes undercover with the name Braden to try to basically bust the Westerly family, find out who their supplier is, and, get the drugs off the street. And because this is a fractured fairy tale and a dark, spicy romance, he ends up falling in love with Evelina, who is the representation of, the Wicked Witch of the West, Elphaba. I don't care about this story. I don't care about these characters. And also, I'm so tired of, mafia drug romances. It just didn't do it for me. I was reading it and my husband asked how the book was, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to finish this ridiculous book. And he's like, you don't have to finish it. And I was like, yeah, but I only have, an hour left in the book, so I might as well finish it. Because that's how I am. It's very hard for me to DNF, especially when I get, far enough. I'm like, I was interested enough, I guess. But, yeah, I mean, It was a dark, spicy romance. It was my least favorite out of the 3 Emily McIntyre books that I've read so far. These are books that I kind of just pick up when I don't have anything else to read and I just need like a mindless, spicy book to read, is usually when I download these books. So my first 3.5 star book was What Kind of Mother by Clay McLeod Chapman. I have such a hard time saying his name. I got this in like as a physical book for my library, but I also found the audiobook on my library app, so I ended up listening to this. This wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great. It was super weird at the end. In this book, you are following Maddie, who has recently moved back to her small hometown with her 17-year-old daughter. Maddie is in town and she is a palm reader, a psychic. She isn't really, but that's how she makes her money. While at the farmer's market one morning, she runs into an old classmate of hers named Henry. The women at the farmer's market tell her that Henry's son, Skylar, went missing several years ago, and that his wife, Grace, unalived herself when Skylar went missing. Maddie reads Henry's palm and sees something. She sees something, and she never really truly does see things, so she's like, whoa, what is this? And she wonders, can I help find Skylar? Can I help figure out what happened to him and where he ended up? And the story kind of goes from there. It was an okay story. It's told from 2 points of view. So some of the chapters are from Maddie's point of view. Some of them are from Henry's point of view. It had a very strange ending. I liked the ending, but I don't know. Clay McLeod Chapman just writes very strange books. This is only his second book that I've read. The other one I read was Ghost Eater, and I liked that one a lot better. So I'm glad I read this one, but it just, it was okay. It was kind of weird, and it was just kind of mediocre for me. My next 3.5 star book was Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist by Rachel Kahn and David Levithan. I read this for the Buzzword Readathon, the Buzzwordathon hosted by Books and Lala. The prompt for July was math words, or like mathematical words, and so infinite is how I picked this one. It's also a book that I own. So again, try to shrink these shelves all the time. So anything for any like readathon that I can get off my shelves, I'm going to pick that one. In this book, you follow Nick and Nora. They meet one night in New York City when Nick's band is playing a gig and he sees his ex-girlfriend, turns to Nora and says, "Will you pretend to be my girlfriend for 5 minutes?" And things kind of go from there. This is also a movie. I love the movie. I love the soundtrack. I love the movie. And I did find out, looking at like timelines, the book did come out before the movie. So the movie is an adaptation of the book. The movie is so much better. This book, first of all, did not age well. Some of the stuff I'm like, really? Okay. And just for being in their heads, I don't know. It just, the story wasn't, I don't know. I ended up listening to this one too. I found it on Libby, and I'm glad I did because I don't think it would have been fun to read. It just, I don't know. I'm sad because I love the movie so much, and if you're interested in this, then just watch the movie because it's so much better than the book. But it's a book that, you know, fulfilled a reading prompt, and now I can check it off my... Now I can take it off my physical TBR list. The paper for it is somewhere in here. Just like No One Writes for Free, I also own that book. The paper is in here in my TBR jar. A lot of these books I've read that I haven't pulled the papers for, and I just haven't gone through and like pulled the papers out. So eventually I'll do that, and we'll get to add more paper to this jar, which is the I've read this book jar. But right now, just pretend like I have a paper to put in there for Nick and Nora. The next 3.5 star book I read was Camp Lanier by Sylvester Barzy. I downloaded this as an ARC from NetGalley, and I read it during Summerween for the prompt, a book set in summer. When I had downloaded this, I did not realize that it was young adult horror. That was on me. I've talked about this before. I've just read a lot of young adult stuff lately, and especially young adult horror, and it's just not doing it for me right now. In this book, you are following Taylor, who was accused of a crime she didn't commit and forced to do work, like community service workforce tasks at a summer camp at Camp Lanier. When she gets there, she starts seeing and hearing strange things and sees ghosts and finds out the camp is not as peaceful as it seems. It also has a dark history. I read this book during Summerween. In my Summerween vlog, I talked about one thing I really hated about this book. So Taylor gets in trouble, and so she has to go to court. She is accused of a crime that she did not commit, and she has the choice to go to jail or go to summer camp, and she looks at the judge and she goes, "I've never been to camp before." That's Holes. That is exactly what Stanley Yelnats says in Holes. He was, accused of a crime he didn't commit. He had the choice between jail or summer camp, so he went to summer camp and looks at the judge and says, "Well, I've never been to camp before." I'm sorry. I really love Holes. I love the movie. I love the book. It's a great adaptation. And it just really annoyed me. It really annoyed me that's like, I don't know, not even taking inspiration from that. It's like straight up copying it. But anyway, this book was recently published, and on my Facebook, in my reading groups, I have seen so much buzz about it. I just thought it was mediocre. And not just because it was young adult. I don't know. I didn't really care. I read it really quickly, but part of it's because I was at my son's basketball practice and didn't have anything else to do, so I sat and read most of the book then. But just, I don't know. I wasn't that impressed with it. I don't have anything else to say. I read the book. I'm glad I read it. I wasn't that impressed, and now I'm going to move on to another book. My last 3.5 star book was The Whisper Man by Alex North. I found this book at my library and had been hearing about it, so I picked it up. In this book, you are following Tom Kennedy and his son Jake. They recently moved to a very small town and bought a really creepy house. Unbeknownst to him, 20 years ago, that town was home to a serial killer that abducted boys and unalived them, and his nickname was the Whisper Man. Even though the Whisper Man was caught 20 years ago, another boy has been abducted, and it has the same MO as the Whisper Man. Tom doesn't know anything about this, and then one day his son Jake is downstairs and talking to someone who is not there. And again, very similar to the MO of the Whisper Man. It's a crime thriller. I'm not gonna lie, I read this book while I was watching Criminal Minds, and in my head, parts of it got confused. I had to turn Criminal Minds off because this is very much like a Criminal Minds episode, but not as good. I thought this book was okay. I don't know. I guess crime thrillers aren't for me. It wasn't as mysterious, thrilling, horrific as I thought it was going to be. It wasn't that interesting. It actually took me a little while to get through because I just didn't really care, but I wanted to know what was going to happen. I don't know. I thought it was okay. Obviously, just mediocre for me. I've heard great things about it, but it's not one that I would necessarily recommend. I think there are probably better crime thrillers out there. My first 4-star book for July was First Light by Liz Curran. This is the sequel book to Night's Edge. I read this book for Summerween for the prompt read a thriller or horror book. In this book, you are picking up 9 months after the events of the first book. You are still following Mia and kind of seeing the aftermath of what happened at the end of Night's Edge. Just like the first one, this one does have chapters that time hop, so some of the chapters are right after it happened. Like, the first book ends in June, so some of the chapters pick up, the first couple chapters pick up right there and then go on. The other chapters take place 9 months after everything happened. It's hard to talk about this one because it is a sequel and there's a lot about the story in this one that can ruin the first one. I liked this one, and I ended up reading it right after Night's Edge, and I was very happy that I did because I like the characters. I love Liz Curran's character work and the world building. I just didn't like this one as much as I liked Night's Edge. My next 4-star book was 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. This is a book that I had picked out of the TBR jar, so I do have the piece of paper for this one. So it's going to go in this jar, which is where I keep all the books, you know, that I pick out of the TBR jar that I've read. I put them in here. So we're kind of, you know, getting a little more full. This is the first Peter Swanson book that I've read, and although I have the physical copy, I also found it on my library app, so I listened to it as an audiobook. I highly recommend. This is kind of a play of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. One day, 9 people receive an anonymous letter that is just a list of 9 names, including their own, and that's it. So their name is on this list, but they don't know at all. They don't recognize any of the other names. They don't have any connection to any other person on this list. And most of them just forget about it. Oh, it's just some random list. I don't know. Then, one by one, names off the list start disappearing because the people start being killed. And then the others are kind of like, oh, well, maybe I should pay a little bit more attention. It's kind of like a crime mystery thriller. I really enjoyed this one, and I wanted to know what was going to happen. I didn't know who the killer was until, you know, they revealed themselves. But I've said before, I don't read books and like try to look for clues. I'm very rarely am I the one that's like, oh, I figured it out, because that's just not the way my brain works. So I was pleasantly surprised when I found out. But I really liked it. I thought it was a very interesting story. It had a good ending. Because of this, I do want to read more of Peter Swanson's work. I just haven't picked anything up, but I definitely would be interested in other books that he's written. My next 4-star book was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I read this book for Summerween for the prompt, read a book with a night sky on the cover. Again, although I own the physical book, this is one that I found at the library so that I could read it during Summerween because I had so many other physical books I was reading. And sometimes it's just easier for me to listen to audiobooks. This was a great audiobook. Like, I had more than enough time that I could have stopped the audiobook and read the physical copy, but I enjoyed the audiobook too much, and so I just kept reading it that way. Station 11 is a science fiction book based on a world that was devastated by a pandemic. This takes place 20 years after the pandemic happens. Some of the chapters also take place like before, you know, day one or whatever you want to call it, before the epidemic begins. So it's a mixture of what the world is like 20 years in the future and what the world was like beforehand. You're following several different characters. Again, I really liked this book. It was an interesting premise. Sometimes I can't tell you why I rate a book the way I rate it. Like, why is this one a 4? And not a 4.5, even though I say I really liked it. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like 4.5. It just feels like a 4. It was a good book. I'm glad I own a copy. I would like to go back and read it sometime, you know, when I don't have 1,000 other books to read. But I did enjoy this one. I liked the story. It makes me, you know, it was just interesting to see someone's perspective of what the future would be when we don't have technology. Like, they talk a lot about there's no cars, there's no airplanes, there's, you know, no electricity at all. And so life has really changed. And how does America survive as that? Like, in that way, in that situation. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And overall, I really liked this one. There is a TV show. I think it's on Prime, maybe. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm probably going to check it out soon because now that I've read the book, I can watch the TV show. My last 4-star book was Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. I'm sorry, I know that I completely slaughtered that name. This was an interesting book. In this book, it is set in America in the future. America has enacted this program for felons, people in prison, things like that, where instead of serving out their time in prison or in jail, they can sign up to be part of a chain gang. Basically, it's televised death matches. You go in, you're on a chain, and you go into an arena and it's you against another inmate and you fight to the death and it's televised. You follow one specific character on her chain. You start where she first begins her very first, match. There are other characters that you follow too. You find out that not everyone in the world agrees with this idea and they don't think that these death matches should keep happening. This book was so thought-provoking in a way that you wouldn't think it would be. It has so much information and really makes you think about, like, the prison system. It's very deeply rooted in, racism and talks about that. It talks about sexism in a way that's not overtly, hey, this is what we're talking about. And I do appreciate that. I was really invested. I've heard mixed reviews about this book. I'm glad I read it because it was just so interesting to me. And it was a little confusing at first because it definitely jumps between characters. Some of the characters, like some of the chapters are written in third person, some of them are written in first person. And so that's a little confusing at first, but if you keep going through, it turned out to be a great book. And again, I'm really glad that I was able to find this at my library and pick it up. My first 4.5-star book was Below by Laurel Hightower. I read this for Summerween. This was the book I read in the dark. So I found it at my library, but I also actually ended up buying a copy for my Kindle because it's easier to read my Kindle in the dark. This book, the first 70% of it freaked me out so much. I did not realize that a big chunk of this book was going to take place in a cave. Caves freak me out. I don't like the dark. I don't like small spaces. I was definitely like, ugh, during a large chunk of this book. In this book, you are following Addie. She is on a road trip to meet her friends for, I think it's like a horror convention or something like that. She stopped at a rest stop because the roads are getting bad, the weather is getting bad. And she meets up with a truck driver named Mads, and he understands that she doesn't necessarily want to get too close to him because she's a woman alone at night and he is a random stranger. He offers to escort her on the highway. She can, because the weather's getting bad, that they could drive together. They could drive in the same direction. Like he would drive and she would follow to make sure the roads are okay. Well, while they're on their way, there is an accident and Mads' truck falls off a bridge. And for some reason, Addie thinks that she can save him, so she climbs down to find him. And that's where the cave picks up. It really freaking freaks me out. The only reason this book is a 4.5 instead of a 5 is I didn't really care for the last 30%. I was super freaked out, and then I read it, and I was like, oh, It wasn't very scary after I got to the freaky part. And then I understand the ending. I thought it was okay. It wasn't my favorite ending. But overall, it's a very short book. It's 100 pages, 110. Let's see. It's 106 pages. So if you're looking for a creepy book that takes place partially in a cave and has a creature in it that may or may not be Mothman, I suggest this one. Laurel Hightower writes some real good stuff. I read Crossroads by her last year, and I really enjoyed that book too. And after reading that and then reading Below, I really want to check out some more of her books because I really like her writing style and her ability to put so much feeling into her writing. My last 4.5-star book was How I'll Kill You by Ren DeStefano. This is another one that I picked out of the TBR jar, so I have the piece of paper for it. Let's add it to our red jar. Hooray, hooray. I really liked this book. In this book, you are following a woman named Sissy. She and her family have vowed never to fall in love, and whenever they do think that they're falling in love, they must kill the man that they fall in love with. Sissy's sisters have done this 3 times each. This is Sissy's first time where she gets to pick the prey. The problem is Sissy finds herself starting to fall in love with Edison and questioning to herself whether she can actually follow through on the task and complete the pact that she's made with her sisters. I loved this book. It was so interesting. There was some parts that I was like, I don't know how to describe this book. I read it so quickly. I loved it. I loved the character work. I loved the interactions between Sissy and her sisters. You get to find out about their past. You get to find out more about Edison, who is the man that Sissy is targeting. I really enjoyed the ending for this one. I did not see that. I didn't see it coming. This was a great horror thriller. Not really horror. It's scary because it's about serial killers. But not scary in that, there's not, body horror on every other page or anything like that. But I really enjoyed this one. I really liked it. I'm really glad that I picked it out. And yeah, I highly recommend this book for if you're looking for a fun time that's just, kind of a unique, it's like a thriller romance kind of. I recommend this book. All right, now we are on to the 5-star books. I have 2. The first one was Night's Edge by Liz Curran. I read this book because my friends and I decided to start a book club, and we each submitted choices for what to read for our first month, and my choice won, and it happened to be Night's Edge. And I'm so glad I read this. I loved this book. In this book, you are following Mia. The book starts when Mia is 10 years old in 2010. She wakes up, goes to see her mother, and her mother is dead on the couch. But her mother is not as dead as she believes. This is a book about vampirism. Her mother has been turned into a vampire. But it's in a way that this is a normal thing for this world. People have this disease or virus. They're called SARAs. That's the name. I can't remember the full name of the virus. So you are following Mia. The chapters jump back and forth between when Mia is 10 in 2010, when this first happens, to nowadays, which is basically 2023. And you get to see kind of what her childhood was like with her mother with this disease, and how they've survived this long. But also you're watching as Mia is kind of learning that she doesn't always have to be what everyone wants her to be. She can be her own person and break the rules, and doesn't have to have such a dependent relationship with her mother. I really liked this book. I'd heard a lot of things about it. I picked it up earlier this year, and I'm so happy that it was my book club pick, because it was just, I read it so quickly. The writing is great. The character arcs, wonderful. I love the way that Mia grows in this book, and the ending was surprising. But I don't know. Something about this book, it just hit right. It's a 5-star. Loved it. So happy I finally got to read it. My last 5-star book for July was Magnolia Parks: The Long Way Home by Jessa Hastings. I have said before, these books have me in a chokehold. They have taken over my life. This is the first one that I've given 5 stars. This is the 3rd book in the Magnolia Parks series. You are following Magnolia and her ex-boyfriend, BJ. In this book, it takes place about a year after the end of Magnolia Parks. Again, it's hard to talk about some of these books because they're not the first in a series, but this is still very much toxic romance. Magnolia and BJ just can't get over each other. It's a will they, won't they, we're going to get back together. Just kidding, no, we're not. But this had some background. I teared up several times during this book, and not just at the end. I don't know, Jessa Hastings, her writing, it just calls to me, and I care about these characters, and I want to know what's going to happen, and I don't feel like I'm there because they're 24-year-olds in London and they're rich, and that's totally not me, but I need to know what happens in their lives. I'm so invested in them and their relationships, and I just love the way she writes them. I love the writing. It's just so lyrical, and it's unlike anything I've ever read before. So, and this is not the type of book that I ever read. Like, yes, I read romance books, but not romance like this. I highly, highly, highly encourage you, even if you don't think that you'd like this book, please check out the first one. Although I've heard a lot of people that say they don't like the first one. I don't know. Something about it, it hit right. I love her writing. I love these characters. I love how messy all of the relationships are. I can't get enough. And I need to keep talking about it because I'm so obsessed with this book and this universe. And I have the last 2 books from the library, and I can't wait to jump into those and find out what's going to happen in the next couple books. Those were all the books that I read in July. A very large mix, like a very big range of star ratings. Again, kind of just overall mediocre, but I got a lot done. I participated in 2 readathons. I got a ton of books off of my physical TBR, and I'm super happy about that. We are a couple days into August, and I'm getting a start on those books, and we're doing great so far. I can't wait to talk about all of August's books in another video. So I hope you're doing great, and I want to know, have you read any of these books? What did you think? All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.